Hi, this is Dave Palmer, and we are back to St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone as we're moving through the Summa, and we're talking about a section of the Summa now called Habits, Virtues, and Sin. We've talked about habits, we talked about virtues. Now we're going to focus in on sin and what exactly is it and how it relates to virtue and the human life, and of course our goal in life, which is to get to God, and how does that you know, of course, kind of put a block in our goal of happiness, right? So Thomas asks in the Prima Secunda section of the Summa, question 71, Article 2, whether vice is contrary to nature. Now, this is very important because it's often asked, are we good by nature or are we bad by nature? Are we naturally sinful or naturally virtuous? And Thomas would definitely say we are naturally good, okay? And sin is an aberration. Sin is not the way we typically would be. So here's what he says, and I'll show you some illustrations here. Vice is contrary to virtue. Now, the virtue of a thing consists in its being well disposed in a manner befitting its nature. All right, here's an example. You see a beaver building a dam. Well, you're not going to be too surprised because beavers build dams. That's part of their nature. Now, if you saw a snake building a dam, you'd say, wow, that's kind of weird because snakes don't typically build dams, right? Hence, the vice of anything consists in its being disposed in a manner not befitting its nature. Nature is a very important word in the Summa. But it must be observed that the nature of a thing is chiefly the form from which that thing derives its species. Now, man derives his species from his rational soul. Now, let's give another example of nature, all right? You see a possum at night, you might think, well, possum are nocturnal creatures, right? If you see a possum during the day, that's typically a sign that there's something wrong because it's not typically in the nature of an opossum to be out during the day because they're nocturnal creatures, right? What about you see something like this, a dog and a cat playing chess? Well, you're going to think it's kind of funny because it's not part of their nature to be able to play chess. They don't have rational minds like human beings do. And so therefore you see a picture like this and you think, that's kind of cute, a dog and a cat playing chess and another cat watching on, right? Not part of their nature. All right. So we move on and we'll say this line again. It must be observed that the nature of a thing is chiefly the form from which the thing derives its species. Now man derives his species from his rational soul. Consequently, whatever is contrary to the order of reason is, properly speaking, contrary to the nature of man as man. Drunkenness, okay, this, even though it happens a lot, it's contrary to our nature because it's not reasonable to take away the very faculty that makes us who we are. We are reasonable creatures, and to take our reason away through drinking too much, that's unnatural, right? While whatever is in accord with reason is in accord with the nature of a man is man. So helping the homeless, doing something good, doing something virtuous, that is in accord with our nature, okay? Now man's good is to be in accord with reason, and his evil is to be against reason, as Dionysius states. Therefore, human virtue, which makes a man good, and his work good, is in accord with man's nature, for as much as it accords with his reason, while vice is contrary to man's nature insofar as it is contrary to the order of reason. All right, so does that make sense? Hopefully those images help you a little bit. All right, whether sin is fittingly defined as. How would you define sin? Okay, gluttony and stealing cars, burglarizing. Okay, we know these are sinful things. So road rage, saying stupid stuff, as long as it's voluntary, it would be a sin, right? Riots, destruction of property, hurting people. Of course, there's a lot of different kinds of sins. Thomas defines sin as a word, deed, or desire contrary to the eternal law. All right? Now, here's his explanation. Sin is nothing else than a bad human act. Now, that an act is a human act is due to its being voluntary, right? Whether it be voluntary as being elicited by the will, for example, to will or to choose, or as being commanded by the will, for example, the exterior actions of speech or operation. Again, a human act is evil through lacking conformity with due measure. And conformity of measure in a thing depends on a rule from which, if that thing depart, it is incommensurate. All right, so in order for something to be virtuous or to be sinful, we have to have a rule. How can we determine if something is right or wrong? Now, there are two rules of the human will. One is proximate and homogeneous, It sounds like they're talking about milk here. The human reason. The other is the first rule, which is the eternal law, which is God's reason, so to speak. Accordingly, Augustine includes two things in the definition of sin. One pertaining to the substance of the human act, and which is the matter, so to speak, of sin when he says word, deed, or desire. The other pertaining to the nature of evil, which is the form, as it were, of sin when he says contrary to the eternal law. We are going to be going in a couple of videos from now into the different types of law. Eternal law is basically everything that's in the mind of God, which is everything. And when we deviate from that, it is a sin, especially if it is voluntary. If you voluntarily do something that's contrary to God's eternal reason, eternal law, then that's a sin, right? But on a more proximate basis, God has given us reason to figure things out. He's given us a conscience, and so when we break our conscience, when we do something wrong and we willfully do it, then that is a sin. All right, that's going to do it. This has been our section on sin. We have one more. We'll get into original sin and concupiscence and things like that, and that will be the next video in this series, and then we'll get into the law, which is a very interesting part of the Summa. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing and liking and subscribing and all that good stuff, and telling your friends about it as we learn the Summa one video at a time. God bless you. Thanks for watching.